Hello everyone and welcome to Investing by the Books, a podcast by Redeye. I'm your host, Eddie Palmgren, and with me in the studio is my friend and colleague Niklas. How are you today?
I'm relaxed and I'm really excited to speak with today's guest.
Yes, in today's episode of Investing by the Books, we have the great pleasure of speaking to Derek Lidow. Derek has a PhD in applied physics, has been the CEO of a public semiconductor company before starting his own company and selling it for $100 million. Since 2011, Derek is a professor teaching entrepreneurship at Princeton, and he is the author of 3 books: The Startup Leadership, Building on Bedrock, and now his latest title, The Entrepreneurs, The Relentless Quest for Value, which we will talk about today. What is the book about?
What we learn early from reading the book is that entrepreneurs have really shaped our current society and will shape our future. And this book takes a historical perspective, looking at the past 9,000 years of entrepreneurship, and tries to answer the question, what is a good entrepreneur? And to understand the consequences of entrepreneurship for us as individuals and as a society. And we believe this is highly relevant for investors because we think it helps with understanding the durability of businesses. And if they don't treat the employees, the other stakeholders of the business, then we don't think it will be durable, which has huge implications for the value, of course, of the company.
Definitely. And how does the book relate to our quality rating that we use here at Redeye?
So the book is about entrepreneurs, which of course is an important aspect of our people rating, because it's not only about starting a business. It's about intrapreneurship as well, that the people in the business can start new business areas and so on. And I think that part of entrepreneurship is a bit underappreciated and interesting to think about. And as Richard Lawrence said in episode 25, the businessman made the business. And at the same time, the business rating, including the products and the competition, is also vital to understand the success of entrepreneurs.
The Entrepreneurs is published by Columbia Business School Publishing and was released in digital format in September 2022. And the hard copy is actually published on November 15th, so today this episode is released. And we are thrilled to have the author on the show today. Here comes our conversation with Derek Lidow. So hello, Derek, and welcome to Investing by the Books podcast.
Eddie, glad to be with you.
Thank you for taking the time. Where are you today?
I'm in New York City, so it's a bright fall day here.
Is it a home office or where are you?
Yes. This week the university is on holiday, so I'm not down in Princeton. I'm up in New York.
I see many nice books there in the background that we will probably touch on later. And we will also go deeper into your career later in the conversation. But to begin, how did your passion for business and entrepreneurship begin?
Well, business and entrepreneurship are two different things. I actually was destined to be a scientist in school, and went to graduate school and got my PhD in applied physics, and had opportunities to be a professor at that time. And right at the last moment, I decided that having a career in a laboratory with just a limited number of people around would be too confining. And so I went and told my professor that I really wanted to work out in industry and have a bigger, broader impact than I could writing academic articles on theoretical physics. My professor wasn't happy about that. He didn't talk to me for a couple of weeks, but I went into industry. I went into established companies and I worked in their laboratories, but was picked out for having qualities that would make me a good manager. And so ultimately, my career went into management fairly quickly out of the laboratory. And I rose in the semiconductor industry ultimately to be the CEO of a large global publicly held semiconductor company. And I did that very successfully for about 5 years until I got this idea on something that I felt needed to be done for the semiconductor industry. And I tried getting other people interested in doing the idea, but nobody would. So I literally put my money where my mouth was. And I went and I retired as a successful CEO. And I started a company literally from scratch. There was just me and my personal assistant sidekick. And we started a company from scratch to provide this information to the first semiconductor world and then to the entire tech world that they couldn't get. And I knew as a CEO that I wanted that information and I would pay a lot of money to get that information. And people didn't think it was possible to get that information, but I felt I knew how, and I was able to get the information. And then ultimately grew that company from scratch into a big global player that was the leader in providing all this insight into what was happening in the technology value chain around the world. And we had offices around the world and analysts around the world, and if we were the go-to people, to figure out what was happening in the whole technology space. Ultimately, a very large company, I think the largest market research company on the planet today, came and basically said, "We need to own you." What will it take? And they were a very good company, and so we were able to reach a good, satisfactory deal.
That's fascinating. Can you tell us some more about, how it was for you leaving a well-paid CEO job and start your own business?
Well, so I had been in the semiconductor industry for 23 years at that time, and I had been in the semiconductor industry through its golden age. So I had done well. I had a lot of valuable stock options. I had been the CEO and paid very handsomely. The company had done extremely well under my leadership. And so I didn't have to worry. So I had a lot of, let's say, unfair competitive advantage in doing my startup. I was well recognized and highly respected in the entire field, and so people would take my telephone calls. I knew what I wanted to create would be something other CEOs wanted. I could talk to them and say, "Hey, would you like this?" And they would say, "Yeah, well, but I don't know where you're going to get that. Find that information." So I had that going for me, and then I had been very successful financially, as being an important person, and then the leader of a very successful global semiconductor company. So I didn't have to worry, about sending my kids to college if it didn't work out. And I had enough money to seed the idea. Of course, it never goes exactly the way you expected, but it did work out, and was very successful, and had a very large impact on the electronics world, because the information that we provided gave visibility that smoothed out the boom and bust cycles in the industry. So that's what I wanted to do, was to give this advanced visibility of where things were in the value chain. And I succeeded, and that worked, and the company was extremely successful.
Congratulations. I mean, really fascinating story. And what you say is a bit counterintuitive for me, because maybe it's a myth, but what I hear is that entrepreneurs should really be able to, they should risk it all, more or less, cut off all the lifelines and do what you're aimed to do. But burn your bridges. Can you tell us a bit about that? Is it a myth, or? Yeah.
That is a myth. That is a myth. So in the world today, there are about 1 billion entrepreneurs. The vast majority of them can't afford to risk everything. They'll starve, or they'll be considered outcasts in their various cultures. So the Silicon Valley model of entrepreneurship, which gets all the attention, which is basically shoot for the moon, use other people's money, and fail fast. So those are the three things that you keep in your mind if you're going high risk. Let's go for it. And that model has proven very successful for helping companies grow as fast as they can and get as big as they can. But it's a very, very small fraction of the number of companies that are formed. In the US, on average, you'll get about 800,000 companies formed in a year. About 2,000 of those will get venture capital funding. Maybe 75,000 will get some angel funding. But the vast majority are funded by loans on the home or on your credit cards. But more importantly, they're funded by internal profits that people invest back in, and they therefore grow slower than a VC-backed company. But in many cases, they're a lot more likely to succeed and last a long time. And
you have written a book now on entrepreneurship. You have written 2 books before, but this book is called The Entrepreneurs, and I found it to be a really fascinating read. You took a lot of lessons from history, and I want to ask what led you to write the book?
Well, when that large company came and bought my startup, it was already 11 years into it, but I was soon thereafter invited by Princeton University to come teach entrepreneurship. They were expanding. There were a lot of students interested in it. They wanted somebody who had experience to be part of their teaching staff for entrepreneurship, and I was flattered that they asked, and very happy to go and start teaching entrepreneurship. When I did that, I was interested. I was intrigued by what really is known about what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur. I wish I had access to those books. I mean, I read books on entrepreneurship, but they were mostly books by entrepreneurs describing their own personal successes. And I felt each one of them was really not broad enough, not general enough to really be helpful in the situations I found myself in. So as part of coming to Princeton, I've focused and dedicated. My mission has been to help people be successful, particularly entrepreneurs, by telling them what actually really works and what doesn't work. And this is my 3rd book on that subject. I think if you read all 3 books, you'll find that I wrote them in reverse order. Okay, but that's just how I delved into it. My first book, called Startup Leadership, is actually how you grow an idea into a self-sustaining company. Okay, so it's for somebody who already sort of has the germ of the idea, wants to know how to hire people, wants to know how to, motivate and make a high performing team, and what really works there and what doesn't. My second book, Building on Bedrock, really was a dive into what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur and how to prepare for that. And it was talking to people that were thinking about being an entrepreneur or just about to, had recently started. And it was, what are the facts of the matter? What really can help you prepare? What will matter? And then this book. So in writing those two books, I was still troubled by whether or not our current forms of entrepreneurship are really sort of the end point, or are we just passing through a phase? And there's no way to get at that unless you take a big picture, a big historical picture, and find out how you got here in the first place. So I looked, read all the books I could on, entrepreneurial history and the like, and found out that all of them basically end a couple of hundred years ago, and just assume that the modern age is the only age of entrepreneurship, and that's it. I didn't believe that was true. And basically worked for 7 years trying to find the roots of entrepreneurship, not just in America, which of course isn't going to go back much. Well, you would have thought wouldn't go back much before 250 years, but all over the world. And that required a lot of digging, sometimes literal digging in archaeological sites and through museum collections. And I was shocked what I found. I was blown away. And here it is, so I had been studying entrepreneurship already for many years, right? So I knew that people, felt that this was an important aspect of society. But they felt it was a modern manifestation. I mean, entrepreneurship is what modern tech people finally have understood. And I go back and I find unmistakable entrepreneurial activity. You can't dispute this among hunter-gatherers in all parts of the world as cultures are emerging and forming. You find absolute evidence that there were entrepreneurs there and that they played a vital role in the creation of these cultures. We're talking about hunter-gatherers, 9,000, 10,000 years ago. So Stone Age cultures, are entrepreneurial. So we have it backwards, we think this is a modern thing. No, it's a primal thing. It helps form cultures, not that cultures help form entrepreneurs. So anyway, that just led to all these other findings about how entrepreneurship took root, how it evolved, how it impacts our society in ways that even a scholar on entrepreneurship didn't realize.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just before we go deeper into some of those stories, I would like to ask you about the word entrepreneurship and just to define that, because in the book you write that the word entrepreneur has hundreds of definitions. It is overused and now can mean anything. So what is your definition?
Yeah. Well, I had to basically create a definition that could apply to entrepreneurs through all times. If you look in a dictionary, the common definition will be something about a person who starts a company. But companies didn't exist a few hundred years ago. They're a modern concept. So we're necessarily anchoring in the dictionary that word to only apply to modern times. But there were other words that were used to describe these people in more ancient texts, very ancient texts, and they use things like people who would seek out profit and the like, but they tended again to be not applicable or not helpful if you wanted to find entrepreneurs in anthropological records or in archaeological records. How do you spot an entrepreneur in the rubble of an archaeological excavation? Well, fortunately, there are a lot of brilliant archaeologists that have spotted key components of what it takes to be an entrepreneur that ultimately enabled this creation of a definition that spans all times, all cultures. It's completely unbiased. It's universal. It can apply on Mars as well as here. And that is that an entrepreneur is someone that exhibits three behaviors. First is they are self-directed and supplying for themselves and for their families. So they decide what they're going to do. They're not directed by other people. The second thing is that they have a skill and they perfect a skill that others around them, their neighbors and the like, find valuable and would like to benefit from. And the third thing that they do is that the entrepreneur entices others to engage in exchange so that they can get valuable things in return for their special skills. So it's those three things. So you're looking for those three things. And archaeologists and sociologists and anthropologists have figured out how to tell when that is happening precisely, even from stone, debris.
And I mean, you go back, as you say, I mean, long back in the history over the past 9,000 years. And I'm curious to know, because you discussed that in the book, but I think our listeners will be curious to know who was the world's first entrepreneur?
I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but I was surprised that it was somebody that made jewelry. Okay? So 9,000 years ago, there was this very small hunter-gatherer tribe, basically a family unit, and they wintered in this green area of what is now eastern Jordan. Normally a pretty hot area, but in the winter, this area was cooler with water. And there was this marble outcrop near where they wintered. And it had beautiful, different colored stones. And what they did is that they set up what we would recognize as a factory, okay, an assembly line to take pieces of this marble that they had chiseled out and to make it into an assortment of different beads and pendants. Now, so you had a selection. there were the small size, the medium size, the pendant with, this size and that size. And they made them over and over and over again. Several of them would sit around a flat rock that they had smoothed out so that they could, form the smooth surfaces, so they could drill a hole into the pendants and the like. And they were making thousands of these things, and they were trading them for goats and sheep from more than 100 miles away, in order for them to have a much richer diet than they would have otherwise. Unmistakable, entrepreneurs.
And this is a good story of it. And as you said before, and as you write in the book, the archaeological record really proves that entrepreneurship eventually develops in all urban cultures throughout the world. And why do you think that is?
Well, because entrepreneurs provide us what governments can't or don't want to. So as culture urbanizes, right? Hierarchies form, and the power elite, decides, what's best for them to offer their citizens or the general population, right? And sometimes they, centralize and collect, all the value that they can and redistribute it. Sometimes they're more, laissez-faire, but in all cases, the governments are not able to give the people everything that they want. And so you get these self-directed individuals that realize that there's this unmet need, and they're willing to go and develop the skills to provide that. All types of skills. And so that's why even when rulers try to get rid of the entrepreneurs, they're unable to, because the people want what they provide.
And one of the latest examples of that is technology, of course. And in the book, you compare Mesopotamia to Silicon Valley, which I think is very interesting and probably something very few investors think about today. Yeah. Can you please tell us a bit more about this?
Well, actually, I like an even older example that I use in the book of what is an exact Copper Age analog to Silicon Valley. So it's this place called Shikmin. It's in the northern Negev desert. Okay, and this is 4000 BC that we're talking about. And the hot new technology of 4000 BC is copper, and being able to refine copper and make it into tools. Nobody had seen anything like that. This was totally amazing, just like smartphones, and or the transistor. And so, of course, people, that learned about this knew that it was valuable. They sort of kept it secret. But in the village, people would learn about it. It was 1/3 of the entire village. Basically picks off a portion of this process of making copper tools, and they start specializing in the initial refinement, the next steps of refinement, the molding, the pounding. Each one sort of does their own special part of that, and they produce the tools that then you find throughout the Levant, or the Near East there. And there's a reason. There's a reason that you see this pattern over and over again. It's not that's the earliest sort of concentration, archaeological concentration from 6,000 years ago, but you find it over and over again. And by looking at these concentrations and how they appear and pop up, what you start to see are the underpinnings of how entrepreneurs become successful, how what they offer scales up and starts impacting more and more people, how it evolves from these enclaves into other enclaves, how it starts impacting the world on a scale that is really far beyond any one individual entrepreneur could do.
And your book is full of all these captivating stories from history, and we really recommend everyone to buy the book, of course, to read all of them. But I would like to talk about one of them, which was one of the first entrepreneurs of America, and that is Cornelius Vanderbilt Jr. And I think that is a really nice story. What was different about his style of entrepreneurship compared to the previous ones?
Yeah, so Cornelius Vanderbilt was born in America to Dutch parents, but America was just becoming independent. America was formed by mostly entrepreneurs. People that came to America ultimately didn't bring their businesses with them, didn't bring their inheritance with them. They weren't the nobles or the like. And so they had to create a business to support themselves. And so even in the people signing the Declaration of Independence or forming the Constitution, the majority of these people were entrepreneurs. And that's represented in American culture by very little regulation on commerce and exchange. And this was an environment in which Cornelius Vanderbilt grew up in. Nonetheless, in that time, there in America, the people that were already successful entrepreneurs had a deference to one another. And so competition was, let's say, gentlemanly. Okay. You didn't go out and try and get somebody else's customers, much less try and run them out of business. That just wasn't gentlemanly. And if you aspired, there wasn't nobility in America, but there was still, being invited to, join the clubs and the like. Well, Cornelius Vanderbilt didn't care about any of that. He was gruff. He wasn't educated at all. And to him, entrepreneurship was about competition and winning. And he was fortunate to be his first ventures were funded by some wealthy people that allowed him to help them literally destroy monopolies in America, all the way up to the Supreme Court ruled on how Vanderbilt was destroying monopolies, and that it was okay to do that it was actually the right thing to do. And from that moment, it became an extremely tough competitive environment. I call it sort of the golden rule, strategy. Basically the one that can invest the most into a business can outlast the competition and run everybody else out of business. So he destroyed monopolies, but he was fine creating them, because nobody could compete with them. But they weren't sort of official monopolies. And there's this one instance where he he basically runs an entire railroad company out of business by refusing to pick up their freight, because he controlled all the freight lines into New York City, the harbor, the railroads, everything coming into New York City. And that was the biggest depot for trade going to Europe and the like. So there was all this trade that the railroads were bringing from the New West. And he doesn't like this guy that's competing with him. He stops picking up that freight. Of course, it's wintertime. There are passengers on these trains as well, women with their children. They're forced to carry their baggage across the Hudson River in a blizzard. It is, this is brutal, retaliation, commercial retaliation.
And around what year is this?
1860s.
And how did this change the landscape for the coming generations?
Well, the government looked into it, was appalled, but decided to not create any laws to prevent this. And so basically that sent the message that as an entrepreneur, you take matters into your own hands. You don't wait for the legal system to rule on the contract and whether or not you broke the contract. You retaliate with full force immediately in an entrepreneurial manner. And it also basically says that entrepreneurs are much better at regulating entrepreneurs than governments are.
Right. And which entrepreneurs have you seen after him that has behaved similar or even more brutal, if there are any such examples?
Well, John D. Rockefeller, who was a generation younger than Cornelius Vanderbilt, although they did know one another, took it to a new level. And Cornelius Vanderbilt sort of was the person that controlled transportation to a very large extent. But John D. Rockefeller ultimately controlled an entire industry vertically, and that was oil. And so he started with the refineries, and he used Cornelius Vanderbilt tactics to run his competitors out of business or to buy them out. But he didn't stop at just refinery. He did oil distributors. He did oil pipelines. He did byproducts of oil, and he didn't stop. And so he took it to a new extreme level that then became the norm, and a lot of people copied John D. Rockefeller in trying to create these vertical dominances in things like whiskey or making ropes or the like. Of course, they did that so well and to such an extent and so brutally that ultimately some journalists thought that these people were acting in an unsocial fashion, wrote articles about them, and the U.S. passed their antitrust acts that said, no, you can't just run people out of business. So another entrepreneur then comes into the picture to provide the next type of strategy that ultimately backfires on entrepreneurs. So this is J.P. Morgan, and he has become the most successful financier in America. And he's done that by basically helping railroads that overexpanded and the entrepreneurs that had, overexpanded their railroads and went bankrupt. And J.P. Morgan would restructure these, would bring in the new money to restructure them. There were so many of them. There was a lot of business, and he became the financial king. And he decides that that he's going to restrict competition by buying out entrepreneurs and forming bigger companies that he's going to have be professionally managed. He's an entrepreneur, but he's not going to do the management. He's just going to do the financing. And so he is the one that finally establishes the cult of the professional manager and the cult of the big business. Entrepreneurs now can feel that the environment is turning against them. The government is really supporting the big businesses and not the startups, not the innovators. And so that leads into a period in America of about 70 years where big businesses tried to control innovation through patents, through coercion, but also by them slowing down the pace of innovation so that all their assets could be more efficiently used. And that was what the professional managers decided to do, and what we still teach in business school to a great extent.
It's very interesting. And after those 70 years, what changed that behavior and made the entrepreneurs come back?
What made the entrepreneurs come back was that venture capital had gained enough of a niche that it could provide financing to the new world of electronics that was enabled by the transistor. And that, combined with the fact that the pioneer of the transistor, who was one of the co-inventors, was such a terrible leader and manager that all his brilliant staff rebelled and left him. And this was in what we call Silicon Valley today. And there was just enough money around to fund their laboratories so that they could work much faster than any of the big businesses that were playing around with this new transistor invention. And that was the sort of cat that got out of the bag that showed how the combination of entrepreneurial venture capitalists could support technology-enabled entrepreneurs to innovate and grow much faster than IBM or Philips or all of these huge conglomerates that tried to do the same thing.
And this is in the 1960s?
1960s and early 70s.
I think an interesting pivot there is, we come into the concept of competitive dynamics, which is a big thing for us as investors. We often speak about, for example, economies of scale and network effects and so on. And you have these concepts of scaling supply and scaling demand. And scaling demand, what we hear about today and also a lot in the venture world is network effects. But what can we learn from the history of entrepreneurship when it comes to scaling demand for an innovation?
Well, so scaling demand becomes incredibly important for entrepreneurs once their idea takes hold and they do this initial scaling of the supply. to the point where they realize, hey, I need to find more customers. Okay, I know how to satisfy the customers that are around me and nearby, doing a good job, but I need more customers. This is a historical problem show in that people, entrepreneurs were scaling demand all back in ancient times, but entrepreneurs have gotten good at scaling demand in more recent times by understanding technology, particularly psychology, to the point where it's about getting people addicted. And today there's even a science about persuasion technology that tells entrepreneurs that want to spend time learning these techniques, what colors, how quickly to refresh the displays, and all these things that ultimately create this subconscious bond. It's not really an emotional bond, but it's a subconscious bond that literally ties into our brain waves with what the product or service that they're offering. In video game design, for example, there are secret parts of their programs that can sense when you're getting a little tired and will make it a little easier for you to get to the next level or to get to the next, treasure chest or something like that. So to keep you engaged for that extra level, and then you sort of get the high from getting that, and you're in for another hour. So this is very subtle. It's very persuasive. It adds dramatically to the revenues and the success, of who wins are these entrepreneurs that know how to scale demand. It's nefarious.
But I'm curious to know, taking a bit of a historical view and not in maybe not so historical as you talk about 9,000 years ago, but I'm speaking about like the last 100 years. If you look at companies, brand companies such as Coke, for example, didn't they know a lot of this human psychology also, and also the alcoholic brands and tobacco companies and so on? How does that differ from the technology companies today?
Well, so their basis isn't the neuroscience, but it's the clinical psychology that was developed, Freud, Sigmund Freud and the like. And it was indeed a relative of Sigmund Freud that a double nephew of Sigmund Freud, who created brand, who create the understanding of brand, but it came out of his practice as a propagandist in World War I, utilizing what he had learned from his uncle about how brain works. So this was clinical psychology. So and this was right after World War I, and he literally said, hey, we're learning how to mass produce. We're going to have to learn how to massively create demand. And propaganda technology is going to be extremely useful. The entrepreneurs that copied his techniques never wanted to use the word propaganda, but this gentleman, Edward Bernays, he was proud of the fact that his insights came from propaganda. So he wrote a book, and he even titled it Propaganda. But he's the one that basically associates products with sex, with status, all of those things. He's very famous for his campaigns that got women to smoke cigarettes because it was considered masculine at the time. And he's the one that basically, associated cigarette smoking with becoming slender, and also as empowerment. That this was as women were campaigning to get more political power and the like. Well, you should be smoking a cigarette, and he did it in ways that weren't clear, but the associations were clear enough that it worked on a massive scale. And he's associated for many others, but it's fascinating what he did, and that ruled demand creation, this scaling demand for the period right after World War I to the current, last 10, 15 years of more neuroscience scaling demand.
And if we segue from scaling demand to scaling supply, you also write a lot about that in the book. And this one title that stayed with me is this horrifying one named Slavery Scaled, where we learn about the entrepreneur James Drax and how he scaled up the sugar production on Barbados. Can you tell our listeners a bit about this and what we can learn about the consequences of this?
Yeah, that took quite a bit of digging. And I was amazed and horrified at it. But this gentleman has had an immense impact on how we organize our businesses, how we think about our employees to this day. And he was a very ambitious person who left England because there wasn't enough opportunity for him. And he did a very risky thing. He went on, he was a colonist who was on the first boatloads of colonists on what was then an uninhabited island in the Caribbean, Barbados, that had just recently been discovered by somebody who was blown off, course by a hurricane. And so this entrepreneurial company recruits 50 men to go colonize this island. And it's a big struggle, but this one gentleman, he's the most ambitious, he's the most resourceful, he's the one that survives a lot of the hardship. They're making cotton on Barbados, copying what's being done up in the colonies in America, but that's not good enough for him. And so he goes and to Brazil to learn how to make sugar. And sugar is a product. It's not just a plant that you cultivate and then harvest. And so it requires manufacturing processes and refining and quality control and the like. And what he realizes is that if he's going to be as rich as he can, he needs to scale up the manufacture of sugar from where it was historically at that moment. We're talking about 1640, and where sugar production was relatively small scale. He's a very ambitious guy. He's savvy to what's going on. He invites Dutch engineers to come to Barbados to build him a windmill that can crush sugarcane far faster than anything that any crusher that has been before. And he realizes, well, if I can crush this much sugarcane this quickly, I need extensive lands, which he was able to get. But more importantly, I need hundreds and hundreds of slaves, 500 slaves. He doesn't he doesn't buy slaves like everybody else has up to that point, which is you go to the auctioneer and you buy, I'll buy two, this person and that person. And so you go home with 4 extra slaves. No, he contracts slaves to be delivered to Barbados by the hundreds, by the boatloads. He has just single-handedly increased the scale of slavery, of the transatlantic slave trade, by more than an order of magnitude. More than an order of magnitude. And he shows how you can organize the slaves, how you can organize the sugar production, and how you create these hierarchies of supervisors and financial controls, and also production controls. He's brilliant at this. Word gets out that there's this guy, James Drax. Boy, he's minting money. He's making the most sugar and the highest quality sugar. And books are written about the technique. And those become the standards. That these books are copied almost verbatim over and over again by people that claim that it's their, suggestions or the like. But it's just verbatim what's the description of James Drax's system. And that has become the basis for how we organize our companies, how we treat our employees. They're no longer slaves, okay? But it's basically employees have to fend for themselves for many aspects of their own, safety and health and the like. And that's just the way we accept it. And that's the moment. That's the person that set these standards, that defined how it could be done.
And a nice pivot from that, quite horrible story, but also interesting case study is, I get your overall purpose of the book is stimulating good and sustainable entrepreneurship. One remedy that you describe is that we should rather incentivize entrepreneurs to do good rather than punish those who do bad. Can you please expand on that?
Yeah. So for a very long time, rulers and governments have tried to get their entrepreneurs to behave or to not stir up political trouble. But they do. But governments have been ineffective. They've tried over and over again. But entrepreneurs are wily, and they are good at getting around rules and regulations. They just are. But entrepreneurs all love to be recognized for their successes and for what they do. It's more important to them than the profits. If you look at the historical record, they're more driven by their own self-created status than they are by making another, doubling their profits. It's the recognition. So the problem is we don't recognize our entrepreneurs enough for what they've accomplished. And I was shocked by that. Right? So in studying entrepreneurs, and then, there are all these famous entrepreneurs and they get a lot of media attention and the like. So I assumed, hey, this was already, big enough in the media. But it's not the case. It's actually not big enough. Not big enough because it's the billion other entrepreneurs on the planet and all their innovations and how all those innovations are building up to create things that we want and we need that we're not getting from our, any other way. And it's those entrepreneurs that are not being recognized for the impact, the critically important impact, the impact that our lives, the world wouldn't be an interesting place to be, or a healthy place, as healthy a place to be without. But the problem is that there are also unintended consequences. And we've tried, to sort of reprimand our entrepreneurs when they stir up this trouble. But we've never, or very few instances, have we tried to entice the entrepreneurs, just like they entice us, entice them to be just slightly better citizens. And give them that status, but give the status to the ones that actually, treat their employees very well, and don't throw their waste into the river without refining it first, and that is what will have the biggest impact on making entrepreneurs even more important in helping our planet become sustainable, more equitable, just, all the good things. Because the entrepreneurs, they're the greatest source of innovation. We have no choice. They are the ones that are going to solve these problems.
And another way that you discuss around incentivizing entrepreneurs is through subsidies. And I was thinking about the example in Delhi that is called the Cobra effect. So Delhi in India had problems with cobras and decided to pay for cobra skins, and this led to a lot of breeding of cobras. And then when the subsidies stopped, the breeders let the cobras free, and the problem became even worse than before. So with this example in mind, how do you make sure to capture these second order effects when developing subsidies? Maybe a bit of a too big question, but interesting to hear your view.
Well, I want to clarify. It's really not subsidies, okay, but it's the profit guarantee that can create these massing of entrepreneurs in a new area.
The swarms, as you call them.
The swarms, yeah, exactly. And that's what entrepreneurs do, where they see one entrepreneur has been very successful. I'm going to copy it, and then it gets copied and replicated, and in the replication, it gets innovated, and the scale becomes massive. So governments can create swarms by creating just an initial one or two entrepreneurial successes. The problem with the Cobra one is that you don't create the profit after the first few have successfully shown how to do it the way it was originally intended. If you keep that the profit lure out there, then they'll find all the unintended ways to achieve that profit. That a good example of a profit lure that we all have benefited from would be Operation Warp Speed with the COVID vaccine, and the fact that the COVID vaccines really came out of entrepreneurs. Moderna is an entrepreneurial company still run by its original founders. BioNTech in Germany, entrepreneurial company still run by its founders. And and they, properly teamed up with, Pfizer and the like to access, the existing supply chains. But it was entrepreneurs, and the entrepreneurs did it and could do it quickly, because there was the guarantee that if you do this, you'll get an order for 1 billion units, and that'll make sure you're profitable, and very profitable. But that wasn't promised to everybody, right? So the fifth and sixth person, entrepreneurs to get their COVID vaccines, or the big companies that are always late to the game, and they didn't necessarily get their big orders because the entrepreneurs got there first. So that's the difference. That's how the understanding of how entrepreneurship actually works can benefit governments in how to get entrepreneurs helping with many fewer unintended consequences.
I mean, in financial markets currently, we hear a lot about the concept of ESG. I don't know, how familiar are you with that concept?
Social good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I couldn't help thinking about ESG when I read the book, and how you relate. How do you think it relates to your views on good entrepreneurship? Because I think the intention of ESG is more or less that businesses should be, to think about the environment, social consequences, and having strong governance structures. And I think it's in some way it relates to your view on entrepreneurship. But I would like to dig deeper into that. I'm curious to know your view.
So ESG as a concept really applies to the big businesses, the professionally managed businesses, and are really not something that entrepreneurs necessarily care about. They can, again, particularly if there's this seeding of profitability to do certain things that are social goods or environmental goods, the E and ESG. But it's this myopia that governments tend to have in thinking that big business is business, and they forget about the entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs need to be different. They need to be. There need to be different ministries in government that are focused on entrepreneurs. Yeah, big businesses, that regulation and the like, you got to think about that. They're important, but they follow slowly the entrepreneur. If you want things to change quickly, it needs to be done by seeding the entrepreneur. And they're totally capable of doing things for the social good, not just COVID vaccines. Okay. But they can innovate how to clean up water or clean up air much faster than government labs or big businesses.
To me, much of this comes down to having a long-term mindset, and that is something we have talked to many of our guests before, and like the most successful companies usually have that long-term mindset, and to me it comes down to that. If you cut down all the trees on Barbados to make your sugar plantations, then of course it will work for some time, but not for a long time. So when you were a CEO of this publicly traded semiconductor company, how did you deal with like this often short-termism that exists in the capital markets?
We had a set of values in the company, and to help our employees remember these short series of values, we turn them into a word, an acrostic. So the first letter of each of the values formed a word, not a real world word, but it was called tech plan. So we could refer to tech plan. I mentioned it because the T in tech plan said, take a long-term view. Okay, so that is like a mantra. I still dream tech plan. The E is empower, whatever. C is communicate, whatever. But tech plan, take a long-term view. You have to, if you're building a business that you want to be around 50 years from now and 100 years from now. You take the short-term view, you'll get a short-term benefit, but you'll also get all these problems that come from that, and you'll leave yourself completely exposed and miss the other opportunities that take a longer time to ferment.
We have to discuss we discussed it a bit in the beginning, but that you came from being a practitioner, you ran a public company, you started your own business, and then became a professor and is now teaching at Princeton. When I studied, all my teachers were actually only, from academia, and I think I would have benefited from having someone like you as a teacher. I wanted to discuss the concept that we hear about a lot, is that young entrepreneurs, I think this is a Silicon Valley concept, but I want to ask you anyway, that they often quit school before they are finished to become entrepreneurs. And I think I know the answer that you will give on that. But secondly, and maybe more importantly, what do you think academia can bring to prospective entrepreneurs?
Well, I think that academia has to become more pragmatic in what it teaches. And I think academia in general needs to adopt more experiential learning pedagogies to ensure that their students are poised for success. And so universities can't just be measured on, the students that graduate from our school have taken, 35 classes or however many units, and they pass them. And so they can write a decent, letter, and they, know some basic history or even computer programming. I think it's incumbent upon us to place that learning in a context about how it gets utilized and how it ultimately, hopefully, benefits the world, hopefully benefits the student, the individual, fairly quickly after graduation. And because that's the ultimate mission, is to make successful citizens, to make our populations more self-sustaining and just and equitable, and all of those things that we know we need to work on. So that needs to be the objective. It's challenging for universities because they're not necessarily organized to change quickly, or change in a time frame where even slow-moving forces operate. I know, and I am so thankful that the Princeton, brought me in as a practitioner because they wanted to do this for more of their students, and they've enabled the area, the group that I'm in, which isn't a academic department per se, but it has its whole faculty and staff. And our mission is to be that interface for the students and to teach them how to apply the critical thinking skills and add these other skills so that they immediately can impact the world. When you do that with the students, they stay. Okay, they stay in school. But I teach a class literally that is for students that already have startups in school, and the class gives them academic credit, but it's a very rigorous class that requires them to think deeply about their startup and what they're doing. And it requires them to get the skills that they lack that will cause them trouble or is already causing them trouble, and to seriously, practice and acquire those skills in a context where they know why and how. And so that's a class. It's a useful class. It helps these student entrepreneurs immediately be more successful, but immediately more aware of the impact of what it is that they're doing, and the potential unintended consequences that they can immediately, just by thinking about it, mitigate to the point where they don't have to worry that it's going to be a problem.
I'm sure we have some listeners out there who are interested in taking your classes.
Well, they have to be admitted to Princeton, unfortunately.
I mean, something else that apart from academia now, I pivot to role models, which is one of the other, remedies that you speak about for, to create good entrepreneurs. I've heard you speak about that you hope that more people should strive to become Sam Walton, for example, instead of Elon Musk. Why do you think Sam Walton is the better role model?
Well, he was incredibly connected to both his customers and his employees. And the steps he took were deliberate, slowly evolved, in other words, carefully evolved, okay, to be beneficial for both the employee and the customers. He basically dedicated his life and encircled himself with others that dedicated their lives to doing this. He also set very high expectations of, if we find something that we can do better, let's do it quickly. So he had weekly meetings, and things were expected to change within the next week. People had to report on it the next week. Period. It wasn't like, and if they needed to plan something out, that was done, on Sunday, before the work week started, and then, people, deployed and made those changes. So he was able to create this organization on such a large scale that could change so quickly. It was entrepreneurial. Okay. And he didn't lose that. And yet he did it in a way where his customers benefited and his employees benefited. And that's why I think he ranks as a great all-time role model and entrepreneur.
Yeah, and another inspiring person was John Patterson. And he is one of those characters that Charlie Munger calls an intelligent fanatic, and Sean Eddings and Ian Cassell, they have written 2 timeless and great books about this topic of intelligent fanatics, which we discussed with Sean Eddings in our very first episode here in the podcast, actually. And in your book, you write that somebody needs to write an updated biography of John Patterson. He is the epitome of the larger-than-life cliché. So our listeners are, of course, very interested in reading and writing and investing in business. So please tell us why. Maybe there is someone who wants to write a book.
about John Patterson.
Yeah.
Because he's the entrepreneur that really cracked the code on business to business, on B2B. He did that by realizing that B2B is different than what we call B2C. That to appeal to the business owner, you have to appeal more broadly than just saying, here's my product and this is how much it costs. And so he's the first one that dedicated himself to understand the needs of business and the needs of business owners, and to deliver products in a way that they could immediately use to improve their profitability. And out of that understanding came all the sales techniques. He's sort of like the James Drax, but not as barbaric. Okay. Although he had his own barbarism as well. Okay. But he's the James Drax of business to business. And so his sales methodologies that quite often cross the line of being immoral, but we've adopted into how we run our businesses. But he was this fanatic that actually had this empathy for people. He was very good to his people until he decided that we're no longer with him. So if he felt that you we're no longer mesmerized by him and his personality, then he'd find a way to fire you. But up to that point, he was very empathetic with his employees, and he was very empathetic with his customers.
And CR was the name of the company, right? And
CR, yes.
And
exactly.
it was in the cash register business. So maybe someone wants to write that kind of book, or do you want to write it?
I certainly would hope to inspire somebody to write it. It'll be a great book. It'll be one of those classic biographies. He's such an interesting guy.
And it's been great talking about your book, The Entrepreneurs. What other books on entrepreneurship do you recommend?
Besides my other two, The Startup Leadership and Building on Bedrock. But so when people ask that, they're really expecting a Silicon Valley answer. Okay, because Silicon Valley is the methodology that people that listen to your podcast would aspire to, as opposed to what I call bedrock entrepreneurs that are really not so interested in shooting for the moon, using other people's money, and failing fast if you have to. For the Silicon Valley crowd, I think that Steve Blank's first book, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, is actually a pretty good starting point, particularly because of the emphasis on the customer discovery, starting with really understanding the customer, getting up out of the seat, actually meeting customers, talking to them, wanting to learn what they want and what they're not getting. So I direct a lot of my students, to that book. I like it a lot better than his second book, which is the Startup Owner's Manual, which I find is a little too focused on app-based, software-based type businesses, and leaves out people that are interested in product, actual, manufactured product, and also quite a few different types of services.
I think many of our listeners are value investors and are maybe not so interested in the Silicon Valley aspect of things. Do you have some book recommendations for them that they can learn about entrepreneurship?
I actually think that where I send my students is often to learn about ethnography and a good introduction to ethnography. Why? Because it's a great way to understand how to learn about your customers. And there's a book by a former colleague of mine, Sheila Pontus, and I'm blanking on exactly what the title of the book is, but it's basically applied ethnography. It's a book of techniques that you use to learn about the customer, and it's just so useful and practical and so easy to read, and got lots of diagrams and illustrations, and you're not going to waste a moment of your time either in learning these things or applying these things.
Maybe we should try to get her on the podcast in the future. Would be interesting.
Yes.
So Derek Lidow, thank you so much for taking the time to come on Investing by the Books podcast to talk about you and your great book, The Entrepreneurs, which we think will come out the same day that we release this episode. So please check out Amazon. Do you have something more you want to add before we finish up?
I'm exhausted. It's been a wonderful hour and a half, and we covered a lot of ground.
Thank you so much. And lastly, where can our audience follow you and all of your work?
Well, I do have a website. That's dereklidow.com, one word, where I post some, not necessarily all of what I write and the like, but just put my name in your Google, watch list, and it'll come up. I write a lot of articles, not just books, and I'm asked to write on a lot of subjects because this is applicable to a lot of subjects. So I have a hard time keeping up with putting it all in one place.
I see. And you also have a Twitter account, right?
I have a Twitter account at Derek Lidow. I'm not super active on Twitter. I tend to use LinkedIn as my social media platform. So that would be, if a listener wanted to connect with me there, I'm very open and look to connecting with all people from all around the world.
Perfect. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Okay. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you for listening to Investing by the Books, a podcast by Redeye. Follow us on Twitter at ib_redeye and email us at ib.podcast@redeye.se. To improve, we'd love to hear your feedback, so please rate and review us. Notice that the content in this podcast is not and shall not be construed as investment advice. This information is meant to be informative and for general purposes only. For full disclaimer, visit redeye.se. I'm your host, Eddie Palmian, and until next time, I sincerely wish you the best of luck on your journey through life and investing.